My name is Michael Hunger. I'm leading the developer relations engineering team at Neo4j. So we build all the cool stuff that you see in the keynotes. So GraphQL, graph algorithms, APOC, all the stuff comes from our team. So if you have fun with that, please let us know and give us feedback on that. Originally, I wanted to talk about APOC pearls today, but then I've been playing a lot of unstable unicorns with my girl, so I thought APOC unicorns might be a better theme. So you'll see a lot of unicorns. I'm also wearing the proper presenter t-shirt today for that. So I grabbed all the images from their site, basically. Today I want to get you powered up from being a baby unicorn to a proper, full-blown unicorn full of power. And how can you do that? Basically, by using what we built on top of Neo4j. So Neo4j is quite extensible. My colleague Max has written about it several times. Basically, Neo4j allows you to add new functionality and new capabilities by either adding extensions to the server or by writing user-defined procedures and functions. And what's really nice about it, you can write it in any JVM language, deploy it to the database, and then access it from Cypher. So you can have custom functionality that's either particular to use case, to your domain, or just generic utilities that do things that you can't do in Cypher in general, and then you can just access them. So in a more proper way, it looks like this. So user-defined procedures and functions can access the execution engine in Neo4j and then access all the graph data under the hood. For the history on APOC, my personally unicorn moment was Neo4j 3.0 was about to launch in May, and in February I started to play around with this new procedure API, and it was really a lot of fun to build these kind of 2, 5, 10-line procedures and get a lot of value out of that. And kind of starting that, I started with APOC, and then when we released Neo4j 3.0 in May, it already had, I think, 75 procedures, and it grew really quickly with a lot of contributors to now 450 procedures and functions in APOC. So it's a ton, and that's why I thought this talk could be useful to give you a clue of some really helpful things that are in the library. It's an active open source project. If you want to, you can also contribute. Most of these functions and procedures are really small, so it's not a lot of effort to write and test them, and then we happily accept your contributions. Usually I show this image because APOC is really literally the kitchen sink or standard library, but today, of course, Unicorn is a better fit, so this is Stability Unicorn. APOC is fortunately available in a lot of places. You can get it in Neo4j Sandbox. And Neo4j Desktop also has a single-click install for APOC, and Neo4j Cloud, if you're a Neo4j Cloud user, then it also comes with APOC out of the box, which is really nice. Installing it in Desktop is just really a single-click away, so you create a database, you can click on plugins, and then you can install APOC or graph algorithms or GraphQL like this. It will also pull the latest version. I just released a new APOC version this morning. And we'll pull the right version from GitHub releases and install it into your database, and also handle config changes and things like that. What's in the box? There's a lot of useful stuff just in terms of utility. So to convert data, to create data, to format stuff, lots of utility functions, lots of data integration, so kind of to allow Neo4j to pull read and write data from other databases. Import, export to Cypher, CSV, and other places. Graph generation, refactoring. So if you have a graph in a certain shape, you want to be in a different shape, then APOC can help you achieve that. And then some fun stuff in terms of running large-scale transaction, job management, time to live, triggers, and much more. And we'll look at some of that. Where can you learn more? I started to record a video series. There's APOC documentation, browser guide, and tomorrow we have a training. So if you have nothing to do tomorrow, then feel free to sign up for APOC training, where we go much deeper into these things, and the Neo4j community forum. But the easiest way to find out something about APOC is just to call APOC help and put in a keyword, and it will list you all the procedures and functions that fit this keyword, either in the name or in the description. So it's quite easy to find stuff that I'm interested in. So that's simply. This clicker's not really looking so well. So the video series is on YouTube, and you can just, so I have now 9 recorded videos, but I'll continue to record them. They're all like between 5 and 10 minutes, so they're really fast to get along. I also included them into the docs, so if you look at the Epoch docs, you also see that in there. What's cool in docs is you also have a searchable table, so you can have just search there similar to Epoch help, and there are a lot of detailed explanations for the more involved things as well. And there's also browser guide, so if you do play Epoch, it will run in Epoch browser guide. It currently covers only parts of the library, but we're adding to that as well. So you can also interactively try out stuff in your own database as well. So let's now look at the pearls that give us some superpowers. First one is data integration. So you see it's kind of fitting to my t-shirt. So since I joined Neo in 2010, I've been doing a lot of data integration, so like the import tool, relational database integration, ETL tool, and other things like that. And so basically with Epoch, you can pull from a lot of different sources. So you can access Mongo, Cassandra, Elasticsearch, Couchbase, relational databases. You can load data from XML endpoints, either files or HTTP endpoints, from JSON, CSV. Recently, we added Excel support. So if you have data in Excel from some business unit, you can also pull in this data into your graph. And also you can run Cypher scripts from Epoch and also import GraphML. Same for export. So you can also export to CSV. You can export to Cypher and export to GraphML, for instance, and to JSON with the next release as well. So it's quite straightforward. Basically, for load JSON, you call Epoch load JSON, pass in a URL or file, and it supports all kinds of web APIs, compressed data, streaming JSON. So if you have these kind of one JSON object per line things, it can work with this as well. And it will provide the data to you as a Cypher map. And then you can just extract things from that. So this is an example from Stack Overflow. This is when you call Stack Overflow API and say, OK, give me the last 100 Neo4j questions, and then you get a JSON like this. And with a single Cypher statement, you can import basically large chunks of Stack Overflow into your database. You pull the data, you unwind each question, and then for each question, you create a question, you create a user, connect them, then you create a text, you create the answers, and the user for the answers, and then you're done. Right? And it looks, after you're done, so the data model looks like this. And this is really an easy way to quickly get data into the graph without bothering too much about like having to write code or having to write large ETL scripts or stuff like that. So it's a really quick way of getting data in. OK, if I'm importing large amounts of data, as you know, Neo4j is a transactional database, so it has to keep the delta of each transaction basically in memory. So Neo4j 3.5 will get some really good improvements there. But still, if you want to import like millions or hundreds of millions of nodes, then these kind of huge transactions are a bit of a strain to your memory. So Epoch can actually has a really cool function called Epoch periodic iterate, which takes a driving statement which produces data, and then an execution statement which actually does the update in the graph. And so your driving statement can return like millions or hundreds of millions of rows, and the executing statement is batched in its own transactions to execute the data. So it can also execute in parallel and can also handle retries. So for instance, you can load data from a CSV with 10 million rows and then create the data in batch sizes of 10,000. So you don't have to worry about using periodic commit because, for instance, if you have stuff like aggregations in between or certain operations that trigger the eager operator in Cypher, it will still pull in all the data into memory first and then do the operation, so it doesn't really help you. While with this one, you won't have this problem. Yesterday, I just for fun ran creating 1 million nodes in Neo4j on my computer here, and with 10,000 batch size in parallel, it takes 1.8 seconds to create 1 million nodes with 2 properties. So that's kind of quite nice. And you see, if I put 10 million in there, then it's actually scales linearly, so it takes 18 seconds or 15 seconds to create the data. And it parallelizes this as well. OK. Something else that you can do with these large-scale updates, imagine you already have a lot of data in your graph, and you want to migrate certain parts of the graph. You want to compute new properties. You want to remove certain relationships, add labels to a large amount of nodes. Then this can also help you to just run a statement on your graph to return certain nodes or relationships, and then do something with them at scale. And that's basically here just creates a new property based off existing properties or existing data. But you can do anything else that you want to as well. OK, There's a lot of utility in APOC as well. So first of all, there are a ton of text functions. So you can split things by regex. You can do reg replace. You can do like printf formats, capitalization. You can generate random strings from given sets or arbitrary random strings. You can even do a UL encode or base64 encode and decode, especially if you get data in from weird sources, and sometimes you have really odd things that you have to deal with. So many of these text functions are actually for dealing with data cleanup during import as well. A lot of collection functions. Cypher is actually quite good with collections. So we have the collect aggregation, which is very, very powerful. We have list comprehensions in Cypher, like reduce, filter, and extract. But there are lots of things that you can't do as easily. So for instance, if you want to sum up a collection or build the average of something, of numbers, if you want to turn a collection into two interleave collections, for instance, to compare start and end nodes of a path of relationships or something like that for certain conditions like airline travel or something like that. Things like that. You can also do set operations on collections. And something like flatten is also quite useful if you have a nested collection and you want to flatten it into a single one. And with APOC collection functions, you can even modify collections. So if you have a collection and you want to add or remove an element or something like that, then you can also do this as well. So that's also quite useful. Something that's very important is toSet, because it creates a unique collection, which is oftentimes needed when you get data from different parts of the graph, but you're only interested in the unique. And you don't want to do an unwind and then collect distinct, but you want to have it in one single function. So most of these are actually not procedures, but functions, so you can call them in any expression that you want. And map functions are also quite cool. So you know that in Cypher you can create literal maps. But for instance, you can't create maps from data. So you can't have arbitrary dynamic keys, dynamic values, but you always have to spell out maps in Cypher usually. And APOC brings at least 4 or 5 ways of creating maps from data, actually. You can merge multiple maps. You can modify maps. And APOC map clean is a really powerful function if you get data from data import and you want to skip certain keys or certain values like not available, TBD, empty strings, null, and stuff like that. So APOC map clean gets rid of all these keys and values that you don't want to have in your import. And you can use it, for instance, to take a record, get rid of all the stuff that you don't want, and then, for instance, create a node directly with all the properties set from this single record, so you don't have to fiddle around with individual things. And group by is a really cool feature because it basically takes a number of nodes, relationships, or maps and turns it basically into an in-memory hash map. So you can use that instead of an index lookup for an 100 times faster, 1,000 times faster lookup of data. So imagine you import products, like 10 million products, and they have like 100 categories, and you have to assign products to categories. If you would do an index lookup for each of these categories, you would do another 10 million category lookups, basically. But if you turn the categories into an in-memory map first, then you can look up categories from this map immediately, and you don't have to do all the index lookup. So it's basically 1 or 2 orders of magnitudes faster to do it like this. JSON conversion, so we can easily take JSON strings to turn them into Cypher values and the other way around, which is very useful. We can take a path from a pattern match and turn them into a JSON tree. So basically, if you want to take a long path, you have a tree. You get all the paths from root to the leaves, and you want to return this as a single JSON document to your client, then APOC convert to tree is quite helpful. And you can also manage complex data types in properties with get and set JSON property, basically, because you can read something and then it stores it basically as string on the property, but if you access it again, it's again a Cypher data type that you can use. Because JSON is everywhere, right? Just like graphs. Graph refactoring, so I thought this is quite fitting. So you just or attach a chainsaw to your unicorn horn, and then you can do anything that you want to, right? And so we have a lot of stuff for refactoring in graphs. You can turn a node into a relationship. You can turn a relationship into nodes. You can merge multiple parallel relationships. You can merge multiple duplicate nodes. Imagine you imported data and then you have duplicate users or something like that. You want to pull them together while all the relationships are then attached to the resulting node and things like that. And you can also redirect relationships, change label names or property names or relationship types, all the things that Neo4j doesn't offer on the surface. APOC makes it possible to do this. Here's an example of merging nodes. So you have kind of some duplicate nodes for Jim Weber here. And we just collect people by a group by email. And then when we have more than one person in this collection, we call merge nodes. And then in the end, we have only one node with all the relationships retained there. And something else that's quite useful for creating data dynamically is because Cypher doesn't allow you to use either expressions or parameters for labels, relationship types, and property names. And APOC brings along a lot of functions that allow to actually use expressions for labels, collection of labels on relationship type or properties as well. So that's quite useful for dynamically creating data from where the structure is part of the data that you get in, and you don't want to have one statement for each kind of a combination of things that you want to. Something that's quite cool that I wrote on a flight from Prague to Paris 2 years ago or so is triggers. Because Neo4j itself has the ability in Java to attach a transaction event handler which reacts to data changes basically from a transaction, but it's not exposed to Cypher. So what we did is added just an APOC trigger add, where you can add a Cypher statement to listen basically for updates, and then the Cypher statement could do something like either veto the update or add additional properties or add computed properties, or for certain kinds of relationships, for instance, make sure that, or if you delete a node, it also makes sure that the relationships are deleted and stuff like that. So whatever you can think of. You could even call things like, oh, write to this file, so you could even have a simple poor man's audit log from data changes, which is quite nice. Time to live is also something that's quite useful. So many databases like Redis, for instance, have these kind of time to live things built in. And in Neo4j, it was much easier to integrate than I thought initially, because we can just use an index on time to live. Because then whenever I query for time to live stuff, it comes from the index. It doesn't have to pull it out of the database. And you'll just add an additional label to a node that has a time to live and set a time to live property. And then when this time to live property is expired, it gets deleted. And you can also have just a helper function that says, OK, I want to expire this node in these few seconds or milliseconds or hours or days. And what it does, it runs a background job by default 60 seconds, but you can configure that to be shorter time frames that finds everything that's expired and deletes it in batches, basically. Right. For aggregation, Neo4j 3.2 added the capability to add your own aggregation functions, which is quite cool, but it's different than all the other procedural functions because they are stateful. So they have to accumulate state for the aggregation. So for instance, you have to sum up values, or if you have to count stuff, or you have to aggregate stuff. And so because some of the things that we usually have to do, for instance, to get the first element of an aggregation, you would do a collect, and then you do head on this, or get the zeroth element, or something like that, which is a little bit unwieldy, and it also creates first a collection with 1 million elements, and only to pick the first element out for you to retain. And so we have now in APOC aggregation functions that have like first, last, or a certain slice of the aggregation is returned, and they don't keep more data in memory than is actually needed. So if you only want one element, it only will keep one element and nothing more. And it also does statistics, stuff like percentiles, or full like median, mean, max, min statistics operation as well. Something that's quite cool that I learned from a colleague of mine, Martin Junghans, is graph grouping. So he built something like this in his PhD thesis. Basically, what you do, you take a graph and you project it to a more granular version of the graph. So for instance, you have a user graph, user-to-user graph, and you want to group these people by continents where they live or by countries where they live. You would get a country-to-country graph with all the people in this country as a count on this node, and with all the relationships that were originally between the people are now aggregated between the countries, basically, right? And so this is here what we do. So we have people that interacted with, and here in this case, we group it by decade, so kind of the decade when they were born. So you would kind of get a distribution over like the age pyramid in your data set. And then if you run this, you get this virtual graph return, which has for each age level, gives you the virtual node and then the connections across the original nodes aggregated onto this. So this is a simple application that I built on top of this grouping function that just exposes that as a nice UI. I wrote a blog post about it. I thought I had it also linked. So, and something that I added only like a week ago or 2 weeks ago is Cypher procedures. So you know that usually if you build and deploy procedures in Neo4j, you have to restart the server to reload the new procedures and so on. And I always wanted to have something where I can just use a Cypher statement and basically give it a name, and then it's available in the database. So what we do is we say epoch custom as procedure or as function. We pass it a Cypher statement and a name. And then it basically creates this functional procedure in Neo4j. So you can then call it by this name as a regular functional procedure. And it will actually execute your Cypher statement in the execution of that, which is quite cool. And you can override them and update them as you like. The only thing that it does, it puts a custom prefix before so you don't override any built-in functions or epoch functions or things like that. Right? You can also pass your own parameters, configure result columns. So you can also have a procedure that has 10 different columns, and you can configure them. And here's an example. We create a procedure neighbors, which just does a pattern match on a neighbor. And I just realized this morning that I had an error here. So it basically returns the neighbor. I pass in a name as parameter, which is then used in the Cypher query, and I return the neighbor as a column. I could have more than one column as well. And then when I call it, then I can just get the neighbors back. And you see that this neighbor's name is the name that I passed in up there. So it's just custom.neighbors, and it's a regular Cypher procedure in this case. And that's quite useful. So it was work in progress, but yesterday I finished it off, and now it's in today's Epoch release available, and you can test it out and use it. So what I want from you is to, of course, use Epoch, pass the word to your colleagues or other people that use Neo4j, report issues if you run into something. We try to fix issues as quickly as we can. And also contribute. If you have something that you've always done, like manually, or if you have written a procedure yourself that you think could be useful for other folks as well, then please contribute them. We accept pull requests also quite quickly. And usually you just need a procedure, a test, or a bunch of tests, and then a piece of documentation, and that's it. And then we can pull it in. If you have questions about Epoch, you can also join our new community site, where we have a dedicated category for Epoch and procedures in general. So there are lots of folks that can help and answer questions as well. And so Epoch on GitHub is, I just want to show that it's a real living open source project. So we have 66 contributors. We have a bunch of issues, pull requests, 600 stars. So if you like it, please start as well. 31 releases as of this morning, and we also added contributing guidelines and code of conduct for the repository as well. So it should be quite easy to get started with as well. And tomorrow I run a workshop where we look into all the stuff that I kind of quickly ran over right now in more detail, have lots of hands-on exercises. So if you want to, you can still join the workshop tomorrow. OK, any questions? Yeah, I will share the presentation. Yeah. So in general, I mean, as we have some time left, yes, please.
I have a question. Can you use Epoch to prevent or to create like a direct section?
A what?
Can you use Epoch to do like a direct section or prevent from direct section? Like MySQL, you use prevent line.
I didn't understand the last word. What kind of section?
Injection.
Or injection. You mean like code injection or something like that?
Yeah.
Usually, I mean, if you call a procedure which has dynamic Cypher in there, you can also, if you don't sanitize the stuff that you get from the user, then you might have this problem. But most of the Epoch procedures allow you to pass in regular parameters, which are then passed in as parameters. So you don't have the SQL injection problem. But of course, if you kind of just concatenate stuff, then you have the problem as well. For some of the procedures that, for instance, create labels and so on, we actually backtake, so we quote the data that comes in. Usually that kind of prevents, so it's kind of a sanitation approach as well. Does this answer your question? OK, cool. It's a bit hard to see with the light, so if you have a question, you have to wave a little bit. So because we have still a little bit of time left, I can also show you some stuff. So it's till 25, right, I think. So we have here Neo4j instance with the latest thing. And is it running? No, actually, no, it's not running. So come on. So as I said, you can easily install Epoch and graph algorithms here just on the plugins tab, where you just click install or uninstall, and then it also sets the correct settings here at the end to allow you to use all the Epoch procedures as well. And so now our browser is running. I hope you can read this. It's kind of a weird thing. So what we can do now is just to give you some examples of that. So for instance, I have something like return epoch text random, and I say I want to have an 25 character random string, right? But I can also say I only want to have 25 vowels, so it will just use whatever I give it as an input. It's probably still a bit hard to read, right? So, but for instance, if I want to do a split of data, so imagine I get a string that has multiple dashes, so between 1 and 3 dashes, and the regular split operator in Cypher just splits on a dash. And you get a lot of empty strings. So with Epoch, you can actually say this is a regular expression, Epoch text split. And then it really treats them as a regular expression, things like that. So something else that I ran this morning, I think here I fixed this. This is this as procedure thing that I showed you, where I have a Cypher statement that is registered as a procedure. I have to change the name because there's still one small issue. Registered as a procedure, as a read-only procedure. You can decide if it's a read, a write, or a schema procedure as well. And it takes a name string parameter and returns a neighbor node. So I can, for instance, change this, so this name here. And what I could also say, I return the size of the neighbor node as degree, for instance. So I return the name as a string. I return the neighbor as a node, and I return size as, I think integer was the, oh no, read as neighbor, what does it complain about? Oh yeah, I started, or I deleted one too much here, I think. Yep, so it created a procedure, and now I can call the procedure. So if I have it here, so I called NB, so like neighbors, and if I just run this, I get all these nodes, and they're, oops, why is size 0? Oh, it's degree, right? Damn it. I called it degree. So you have to pay attention, of course, right? So NB2. So all these nodes have a 0 outgoing degree because they are movies and they have nothing that goes out of them. So, but just to show you that you can do something like that, and you can do the same with functions as well. The other thing that I wanted to show you is the creating of data. That's it. Okay, can just do it like this. So we basically do epoch, periodic, iterate, unwind range of 1 to 1 million. We just have to find the right number of zeros, SID, and then just create node with this ID. So you see that it automatically handles the mapping of this ID, which is actually passed in as a parameter to the second statement by prefixing the second statement internally with an with or an unwind internally. And so you don't have to do $ID or something like this. So I create my node, and I say batch size is 10,000, and parallel true. Okay, let's make it 2 million, so we actually see something. Oh no. What? Oh, sorry, I forgot to return the ID here. So now it runs, and if I look at my activity here, you also see that all the CPUs are busy, but it was too fast. So it took now 6 seconds to create 2 million nodes in database. Right. So these are some things. So in general, what I suggested before, if you call epoch help, and then, for instance, I want to create some data, then you see all the procedures and functions that have create in the name. Or if you want to refactor something, then you just say refactor. And you get the name, the description, and also the signature of the procedure or function as well. So it's quite easy to find your way around here. And if you want to, you can also use the browser guide for Epoch to have like hands-on examples that you can try out. Like here, for instance, we pull data from GitHub. Actually, I could show you the example from Stack Overflow. Let me do this really quick. Just have to find the. There's the Stack Overflow example up here somewhere. So I think I don't have the right. Epoch documentation, Stack Overflow. So here, so it's also in the documentation, the example for Stack Overflow. We just can pull data from Stack Overflow, and for instance, here's the full query where we take this query here and run it here, and it doesn't like us. Why doesn't it like us? Closed. What? Doesn't like our. Yeah. That's weird. Just worked yesterday, so that's odd. Okay, demo gods. But usually it just creates the data and can just return the value. No. So there's something wrong with the reading of the data, so I have to figure out what it is. Okay, that's mostly it. And there's a lot more things in here. If you're interested, so in the documentation, there's also a lot of things about virtual nodes, which you can use for projecting data. Atomic operations, if you have concurrent updates of fields. Exact arithmetics for if you have in financial operations, so if you want to have exact financial mathematics. There's a Bolt integration, so you can load data from other Neo4j databases quite easily by just using a Bolt thing. And then you have a lot of meta information, so you can, for instance, to call epoch meta data and get everything as a tabular representation, or epoch meta schema, then you get it as a tree representation with all the counts and selectivities and indexes and data types of properties, or of course epoch meta graph, which gives you the graph representation of these, also with counts on each of those. And there are tons of more stuff in here as well. Okay, cool. That's it. Thanks a lot for your time, and I hope more efficient and faster with your Neo4j and Cypher projects. Thank you.